Earlier I said that strategy is about understanding the landscape and that connection to it. And I think it's the place to start. If you look at any writers on strategy, and particularly those who come from a military background, Sun Tzu, The Art of War, 2,500 years ago wrote about strategy. Von Clausewitz, 200 years ago, wrote about it. Patton writes about it. Any military writer will say, understand the terrain, because great battles are won by understanding the terrain better than your opponent. And that is just as important today as it was then. And this is as true in the public sector as it is in the commercial sector. Just because you're not fighting the competition doesn't mean you should not be out there understanding the landscape. It's no coincidence that those of you who remember the internet land grab of around 2000, about 10 years ago, it was a land grab. Can we get the clicks? Can we get the faces? It's all about grabbing hold of as much of that as you can and understanding it. So your organization is continuously interacting with that external environment. And one of the dilemmas is we have to come up with a strategy for the organization amidst uncertainty. This is a quote from Graham Leach. He's Institute of Directors Chief Economist. He was talking at an economist briefing to directors about 6 months ago, and this is almost his opening line. We still have uncertainty. It's just the uncertainties we had 6 months ago are a different set of uncertainties to the ones we have today. And I would argue 6 months on, I think we've got another set of uncertainties. Because strategy is about operating in that uncertain environment. Now, we don't have crystal balls. We make assumptions, things change, we have uncertainties. I characterized the economy about 12, 18 months ago as, imagine a landscape that you know, a terrain that you're familiar with, and you're walking out there and suddenly the fog comes down, it starts raining, it gets dark. Everything you know should still be there, but it's a bit difficult to navigate your way around it. And in a way, the economy happened a bit like that. People started to go, oh gosh, let's drag things in, let's get a bit tighter. Customers disappeared in the fog. Someone suggested to me, and people would come up and mug you, because he was experiencing competitors who were going up to the customers and underpricing. And somebody else suggested when I said this, and you don't realise that suddenly the terrain has changed and there's been a great big chasm and you fall into it. So to me, this is about understanding that environment. For goodness sake, get out there and understand as much as you can about the environment in which your company and your industry operates. Because there's a view out there that entrepreneurs are lucky. It's rubbish. Entrepreneurs are successful because they understand the landscape. If you take any of the successful entrepreneurs, the good ones, the Richard Bransons, the Dragons, the Warren Buffetts of this world, they have massive teams doing research. And the more you understand that environment, the more you go out there, the more chance you have of spotting opportunities. That's not luck. That's knowing enough so you can identify an opportunity when it occurs. And that's nothing to do with luck. That is good research. Now, there are some people who believe you can just have a vision. Some of you may have heard the expression, a vision without action is a dream. I'll go one further. A vision without a connection to the landscape, the environment, is a mirage. It's an hallucination. Because you believe something, but you've got no ground for it. Isn't that strange how we use that language? You've got no ground for it. Because the ground is what you have to understand, so what's out there? There's a number of techniques I use for doing this when I'm working with clients. Most of my time I'm working with clients, with management teams. They have a strategy, and I'm helping them articulate and clarify it. And sometimes we'll help them develop it further. There's a number of techniques I use. I've only got time to talk really about one this evening, which is called value chain analysis, which you may or may not be familiar with. And in a typical value chain analysis, you look at your first-tier customers, you look at their customers, and you look at the end consumers. Now I'm going to tell you a story. I had a phone call from an ex-client of mine about 2 years after I worked for them. He said, "Phil, you were so prescient. You said one sentence in that meeting with the chief exec and it just hit the nail for me. How did you know?" Now, what was that meeting and what was that sentence? I'll tell you what it was. It was my very first meeting with the chief exec. And they were a fast-growing company, 40% per annum for 5 years. They'd grown 10 million in the 3 months I was working with them. Nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. And the first thing I did was get a flip chart and go, just help me understand your value chain and what you add to the industry. Now, they happened to be working in the construction sector. The far end of it were construction companies who wanted to avoid buying machinery. So what they used to do, they used to use the big hire companies. So the one tier back was the hire companies. Now, this company was selling to the hire companies. Those hire companies are really, really large. And they've got hundreds of suppliers. And I went, so how come you've got an edge? You've got to add something different. And he first says, well, we give a lot of customer support. And I went, I'm not convinced by that. What really is it? And well, we seem to have products they like. Now, what they were doing actually, they were walking up to the customers and actually to the construction companies, talking to them, going, oh, is that what's wrong with that product? Hang on a minute. They'd go all the way back up their supply chain, nip out to the factory in Italy, go, hey, can you build one of these? Sure can. Can you do me a prototype? Fine. Dum, 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 dum. Would you like one of these? Look at the difference. They were actually walking up and down their value chain, understanding their market, finding the opportunity, bringing it back. Presumably, others weren't doing it quite as well. I've actually seen one of their products running with a fuel cell. Fuel cells, that new technology, one day we'll have them in cars, hydrogen fuel cells. They were using it to get rid of the carbon output of a simple generator. They were really pushing the envelope. So how come they came unstuck, and what had I said? During that conversation I went, this sounds like a fragile business model. Because there was enough of a clue in there for me that it was fragile. 2 years later, they fell off a cliff. Partly because of the credit crunch, partly because they were buying in euros and selling in pounds, but partly because of the fragility of the business model as a whole and the way it worked. So I do strongly recommend you do this technique and ask those questions about where things lie. Work out where the competitors are sitting. Look back up the supply chain at there. Look at your partners. And I mean true partners, not people you just danced with occasionally. And not customers you call partners, but people who sit alongside you. And look, see what the regulators in the industry. Now, I understand this is core stuff for your courses. But this approach was Porter in 1980 and 1985. If you look at blue ocean strategy, which is a very popular technique that suggests you shouldn't be in this area, because if you do this thinking, you'll be in the red ocean, you'll be fighting with the sharks, that's where all the blood is, because you're fighting with competitors. Therefore, you should go for the blue ocean, which is clear. The same thinking in essence applies. If you understand it, you have those opportunities. Because what you're looking for is power in the market. If you understand where the power lies, that's where the cash flows, yeah? You know that. You see that. You see that across your desks every day. So ask about the power, ask about the influences, ask about the legislation. Now, don't just do that, but ask what might change. Because if you're doing strategy as a team, you are making assumptions. So when you're out there, for some of you, I was asking you questions about what's changing in your market, what's going on. I have one networking question for you. Because if you've come here and you've said to someone, have you been here before? You're not going to learn anything. If you come here and say to someone, how's business? They'll tell you an answer. You may or may not get the truth. If you ask them what your customers, how your customers are doing, that's interesting. If you ask them what your customers' customers are uncertain about, to explore their value chain in that first conversation. This is the first question I ask people when I go networking. No matter who they are. We'll have 15 minutes conversation. I won't even know their name. We're discussing their value chain. Did you know, in the property industry, what do you think the leading indicator of the commercial property industry market picking up might be? Architect's instructions. Because that's where the first bit of activity goes on. Now, oddly enough, talking to architects, what sort of instructions have they been getting? Well, oddly enough, architects and heating and ventilation engineers are getting instructions from food suppliers. The Tesco's, the Sainsbury's, the Asda's of this world, who are, interestingly enough, replacing the cold stores in their supply chain. They've got money. Now, you think about it, it's obvious. But it's that sort of question that picks out that really quite interesting fact about where's the property market moving? Where are things happening? Now, you can do whatever you want with that. You could ask it more precisely about your industry or learn things. So my question to you is a networking question. What are your customers uncertain about? So what do you do with that? Well, my suggestion to you is that you systematically ask that as an organisation. Because you are going out there collecting intelligence. Because it's the quality of conversation that you get off the back of that about what each of you have learned that means you, as a management team, are learning things. I call them external predictive indicators. You know the KPIs in organisations is all internal. You're looking for things that are predicting when stuff will happen. And this has implications for your staff as well. Because you can get much, much more out of an organisation if you're all looking for these things. If your staff know what to look for, and I'm asking this question, you will be surprised, you will be amazed what they come up with. Years ago, back in the days when I used to work for Norton and Kaplan, the balanced scorecard people, there was a story about Mobil. And they'd done the corporate strategy and they'd moved all the way down and they'd got it out to the tanker drivers. And they were showing the broad strategy map for the tanker drivers. And the question was, shall we talk about the competitor stuff or not? Oh yeah, let's just put that in because competitor stuff was there. Yeah. But they wouldn't have anything to do with it. So they put it up and brushed over it very quickly. And suddenly this hand came up. So did you say you want competitor information? What are you after? Well, anything about, you know, competitors' oils, performance, those sort of things. Well, how much do you want? What do you mean? Well, we sit in greasy cafes, translate to America, greasy cafes for an hour a day, talking to other drivers about vehicles and stuff. It's easy to find out what make of oil they're using and how it's doing for engine and performance. We can do all that sort of stuff for you. What do you want? So I use that as an anecdote for you to tap into the organisation, to tap into the landscape.